By the time I stumbled into the street, barefoot and coughing, my entire house was already gone. The air was thick with smoke, every breath like swallowing a fistful of ash. Neighbors stood on their lawns in pajamas, their porch lights flickering against the strobe of fire trucks. The sirens screamed. Hoses roared. I couldn't stop staring at the orange glow chewing through the last of my roof, as if the fire had been waiting years for its moment to finally swallow me whole. The smell of burning drywall and scorched insulation clung to my skin. I could hear someone crying. Maybe it was me. That night, Sycamore Lane looked less like a suburban cul-de-sac and more like a war zone. And I already knew whose name was on everyone's lips. Linda. Of course, Linda. Linda McAllister, HOA president, queen bee, and self-proclaimed guardian of community standards. If the devil wore pastel cardigans and carried a clipboard, it would look like her. The very woman who had spent the past 2 years policing everything from the color of my mailbox flag to the way my garbage cans faced the curb. She wrote fines the way other people wrote Christmas cards, frequent, cheerful, and dripping with condescension. The fire chief approached, his helmet streaked with soot. "Do you have any idea what could have started it?" he asked, voice muffled under the chaos. "No," I croaked, though my brain screamed the opposite. I had plenty of ideas, one in particular. 2 weeks before, Linda had taped a bright orange notice to my door. Violation of Section 4, Subdivision B, improper storage of flammable materials. My crime? Leaving a box of half-used fireworks in the garage for the 4th of July? She called it a hazard to the community. I called it a box I forgot to throw away. She'd threatened escalating fines, possible legal action, and the ever-famous line she used at meetings. "Don't test me." I had laughed it off at the time, because who burns down an entire house over a box of Roman candles? Apparently, Linda might. As the fire crew wrestled the last sparks into steam, I caught Linda standing at the end of the street, arms folded across her chest, face lit by the glow of my burning life. She wore a silky robe, hair perfect, as though she'd been expecting a photo op. When our eyes met, she tilted her head in a way that said, "This wouldn't have happened if you'd just followed the rules." I wanted to march over and scream, but the paramedics shoved an oxygen mask on me. By morning, the house was nothing but a blackened skeleton. Reporters never came. Too small a story, I guess, but word spread fast. At sunrise, the HOA sent out a mass email. The subject line, "Tragic event on Sycamore Lane." Linda's message was polished, professional, and venomous if you read between the lines. She offered heartfelt condolences to me and my family, but slipped in a neat little reminder that fire safety begins with homeowner compliance. Neighbors whispered. Mrs. Jenkins muttered over her garden fence that she saw suspicious activity the night before. Todd, who lived across the street, claimed he smelled gasoline. I couldn't prove a thing, but every conversation circled back to Linda. A week earlier, at the last HOA meeting, she had practically declared war on me. "We cannot allow residents to disregard bylaws," she said, slapping down a stack of violation forms. "If one person ignores the rules, it sets a precedent. Standards will slip. Property values will suffer." Her eyes locked on me the whole time. Everyone else stared at their lap. That night I had raised my hand, feigning calm. "Linda, are you really suggesting the community's worth depends on the angle of my garbage cans?" "Yes," she said flatly. "And don't roll your eyes, Mr. Carson. The HOA exists to protect us from people like you. People like me." Now, standing in the ashes, I wondered if she had finally followed through on her threat to protect the neighborhood. But it wasn't just paranoia. There were cracks in her act already. Later that afternoon, as investigators combed through the wreckage, I overheard Linda talking to Officer Ramirez. "Well, of course it started in the garage," she said breezily. "That's where he kept those fireworks. The problem? The fire chief hadn't announced the point of origin yet. No one had. I froze. She knew. She knew something she shouldn't. Ramirez nodded politely, scribbling notes, but I could see the flicker of doubt cross his face. I wasn't the only one who caught it. I didn't sleep that night, holed up in a cheap motel with the smell of smoke still embedded in my hair. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Linda's smirk. Every creak in the hallway made me wonder if she was outside my door with another clipboard ready to hand me my next violation notice, only this one would be a death sentence. And just as I was about to convince myself I was spiraling into paranoia, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. From Linda McAllister, HOA President. Subject, Special Emergency Meeting. Attendance required. The body of the email was short, efficient, and chilling. We need to discuss the matter of last night's incident and the liability it has caused our community. Attendance is mandatory. I stared at the screen, heart hammering. She wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. Funny, Linda said with that syrupy smile she reserved for public ambushes. The fire marshal confirmed it started right there in your garage. The problem? No one had said where the fire started yet. Not the fire chief, not the investigators, not even the nosy neighbors. Just Linda, standing at the head of the HOA clubhouse like she was giving a sermon. The words fell out of her mouth so casually, so confidently, I almost thought I'd imagined it. But the silence that followed told me otherwise. The room shifted. Chairs creaked, eyes darted, throats cleared. For the first time since my house had turned into a pile of ashes, Linda's crown tilted. The emergency meeting was held in the little community clubhouse that smelled perpetually of burnt coffee and old carpet cleaner. Folding chairs had been arranged in a half circle, facing the podium where Linda always stationed herself like a general before battle. She looked immaculate, as usual. Cream-colored suit, pearl necklace, hair sprayed into a helmet. You wouldn't have guessed she lived in the same cul-de-sac as the rest of us. You'd think she was running a Senate hearing. I sat in the back, still wearing the same jacket I'd had on the night of the fire, smoke permanently stitched into its fabric. My neighbors filled the seats around me, Mr. Jenkins with his oxygen tank hissing beside him, the Johnsons whispering behind folded hands, and Todd with his baseball cap pulled low, eyes flicking nervously toward me. Linda began the meeting with a sigh so dramatic it could have won an Oscar. "Neighbors," she said, "we are here to grieve, to heal, and to ensure something like this never threatens our property values again." There it was. She couldn't go 5 words without dropping property values. She continued, weaving sympathy and accusation into the same sentence. "While we are devastated by the loss of Mr. Carson's home, this tragedy is also a reminder that safety violations are not just minor infractions. They endanger us all." Her gaze cut toward me, sharp as glass. "We must remain vigilant." I felt heat rising to my face. "Excuse me," I said, standing up, "but maybe we should wait until the investigation is complete before we start pointing fingers." She smiled, teeth blinding under the fluorescent lights. "Of course, but we all know the garage was the ignition point." And there it was, the slip. Too specific, too soon. For a moment, the room froze. Mrs. Jenkins coughed into her sleeve. Todd shifted in his chair. I could almost hear the collective thought buzzing between my neighbors. How would she know that? Linda realized it too. I watched her lips twitch, recalibrating. She added quickly, "I mean, statistically speaking, most residential fires begin in garages." But the damage was done. Her perfect mask had cracked. I leaned against my chair, pretending to look casual. Inside, my pulse was hammering. "Interesting," I said, letting the word hang, "because the fire chief told me they haven't made a determination yet." Her head snapped in my direction, eyes narrowing just a fraction. If looks could kill, I'd have gone up in flames faster than my siding. The neighbors stirred. For once, they weren't just nodding along with Linda's script. Doubt crept into the room like smoke through a cracked window. Linda straightened her notes, tapping them against the podium. "Let's not speculate. The important thing is that we, as a community, enforce safety standards. That means regular inspections, stricter fines, and mandatory walkthroughs. There it was, her power grab. She was already turning my house fire into her political campaign. I raised my hand again. So, let me get this straight. You're suggesting more fines, more inspections, more control, right after my house just burned down? Her smile tightened. I'm suggesting prevention. If residents can't manage their own compliance, then the HOA must step in. That word, compliance, hung in the air like a bad smell. I could see the unease spreading. Even Todd, who usually worshipped Linda like she hung the moon, scratched his neck and avoided her gaze. The meeting dragged on with Linda hammering rules and bylaws, citing obscure sections like she was reciting Bible verses. I barely heard her. My mind replayed that slip over and over. The garage. She knew about the garage. When it finally adjourned, people filed out slowly, whispering in pairs. I caught fragments. Strange, she knew. Always pushing fines. Maybe too much power. I lingered by the doorway. Linda swept past, perfume trailing behind her like smoke from a match. She leaned in, low enough only I could hear. "Careful, Mr. Carson," she whispered, voice sweet as honey but sharp as a blade. "Grief makes people paranoid. Don't embarrass yourself." Then she was gone, heels clicking across the linoleum. I stood frozen, her words still hot in my ear. That wasn't a warning. It was a threat. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just dealing with a petty tyrant in pearls. I was dealing with someone dangerous enough to slip up and ruthless enough to cover her tracks. Back in the motel later that night, I opened my laptop and began drafting a list. Dates, notices, fines, every slip of paper she'd ever shoved under my door. If Linda was going to play this game, I needed evidence. But as I typed, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. An unknown number flashed across the screen. I almost ignored it, but something in my gut made me answer. A man's voice, low and urgent, said, "I know what really happened the night of the fire. Meet me tomorrow." Click. The line went dead. "Mrs. McAllister," the prosecutor's voice rang out. "If you didn't set the fire, then how do you explain knowing it started in the garage before investigators had even finished their report?" The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Linda's lips parted, but nothing came out. Her pearls glinted under the courtroom lights, and for the first time since I'd known her, the Queen of Sycamore Lane looked cornered. My pulse hammered in my ears. I'd dreamed of this moment for months, and here it was, her empire of violation notices and smug emails unraveling in real time. Let me back up. Walking into the courthouse that morning, I thought I was just there to give a victim's statement. My lawyer had told me not to expect much. "Arson cases are tough," she warned. "Without direct evidence, it's hard to pin it on anyone." Translation: don't get your hopes up. But then the bailiff called out a name that stopped me cold. Defendant, Linda McAllister. I nearly tripped over my own shoes. Linda? Defendant? I sat down hard on the wooden bench, staring as she swept into the room like she owned it. Perfect hair, crisp navy suit, carrying a leather portfolio instead of her usual HOA binder. If she was nervous, she hid it well, at least until the questioning started. The prosecutor wasted no time. "Mrs. McAllister, you are charged with arson, insurance fraud, and reckless endangerment. Do you understand the charges?" Linda lifted her chin. "Absolutely not. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association. My only concern has ever been the safety of this community." That earned a few murmurs from the gallery. I spotted Todd 2 rows ahead, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Mrs. Jenkins clutched her purse tighter, eyes wide with something that looked like vindication. It seemed I wasn't the only one who'd had enough of Linda's reign. The prosecutor laid out the timeline. Surveillance footage of Linda's car circling the block the night of the fire. A gas can found in the trunk, still reeking of fuel. A neighbor's security camera catching her slipping through the side gate toward my garage an hour before the blaze. And then, her fatal mistake, the comments she made at the emergency HOA meeting. That's when they called me to the stand. My palms were slick as I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee. "Mr. Carson," the prosecutor asked, "how would you describe your relationship with Mrs. McAllister prior to the fire?" I almost laughed. "Combative," I said. "She fined me for everything. Lawn too long, violation. Garbage cans not aligned with the curb, violation. She once left me a warning for having holiday lights up one day past January 1st. One day." A ripple of laughter passed through the gallery. Even the judge cracked a smile before banging his gavel. I continued. "She told me, more than once, that if I didn't comply, she would make an example out of me. At the last HOA meeting before the fire, she stared right at me and said the community needed protection from people like me." The prosecutor nodded. "And at the emergency meeting after the fire." I swallowed hard. She announced it started in my garage, before investigators had released any findings. All eyes turned back to Linda. Her attorney leaned over, whispering furiously, but Linda held up a manicured hand to silence him. Then she spoke, voice dripping with sugar. "I said what anyone would have guessed. Fires often start in garages. That's common knowledge." But her timing had already betrayed her, and the prosecutor pressed harder. "So, it was just a coincidence that your vehicle was seen near Mr. Carson's home, that a gas can was found in your trunk, and that you spoke about the fire's origin before officials had confirmed it." Linda's jaw tightened. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered. The gallery shifted again. Whispers filled the room like rustling leaves. That was the moment. The crack in her armor widening. For years, she had controlled us with fines, notices, and smug lectures about bylaws. Now she was trapped under the same scrutiny she'd weaponized against us. Still, I knew better than to celebrate too soon. Linda was slippery. She always had a way of twisting rules, of turning neighbors against each other with half-truths. If anyone could wriggle out of this, it was her. The judge called for recess. The gavel's sharp crack echoed through the room, and people stood, buzzing with speculation. I stayed seated, staring at Linda as she whispered urgently with her attorney. For the first time, I saw sweat bead along her hairline. She looked smaller, less invincible, and yet, just as the bailiff moved to escort her out, she turned, caught my eye, and smiled. Not the warm kind, not even the smug kind. It was something colder, sharper, a smile that said, "This isn't over, not by a long shot." My stomach dropped, because deep down, I knew she was right.